One. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Dean Lloyd here, Lloyd Consulting Co. Back for the new episode of I Invited You On because today's guest is Andrew House, and I invited him on because he's one of the OGs of lived experience, and he has a wealth of knowledge and is a fountain of knowledge. So, Andrew, can you just tell us a bit about you, the work you do, and what you're doing at the moment, or the work you have done?
Yeah. At the moment, I'm working as a peer worker in Windana, which is a drug rehabilitation centre down here in southeast Melbourne. I've been here since February, and I've taken on this role as a peer worker, one, because I'm sort of coming to the end of my career. So I sort of, come out of my, I guess, my addiction through the rehabilitation process and then, into the workforce. And that was like nearly 40 years ago. So now I'm coming. It's like, it's a funny thing. You come out of, from basically being unemployable and now I'm sort of looking to retire. So it's been, I'm at the other end of things, and I've done a lot of work in a lot of different fields, but probably the last 30 years I've worked with alcohol and other drug in that field. So in therapeutic communities, I worked in the prison for a long time, which we'll talk about later, I imagine. And
Yep.
I worked for the Royal Flying Doctor Service for a while. Worked for New South Wales Health. Prior to all that stuff, I drove trucks. I was a garbo. I was a dishwasher. So I did a lot of I suppose just any job I could get, really. So in the early days. So I think it took a while to, I don't know whether the job's found. I think the job's really found me, but I guess my willingness and effort to want to work and to want to be involved in the workforce, I think that was the important thing for me in the beginning.
Yeah, nice. Thanks for that, mate. So can you remember your first job, your very first job, first paycheck, whatever that was like? Might be
wow.
Go now, mate, but
I just left school and I got a job with it was like a Ford dealership as an apprentice mechanic. So and at the time as well, I was actually and I think I had $59. That was my first paycheck for the week.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I actually played a lot of golf as I was as a kid, and then after a few months, I actually got an apprenticeship as a trainee golf professional in Wagga. But I grew up in Griffith, so that was about 100 miles from Griffith. So I was like a 16-year-old kid, and I moved over to Wagga to begin a golf professional apprenticeship. So yeah, and that was and I'd already been sort of drinking quite a lot of alcohol by the time I got to that. So I just
16 school when year 10?
Yeah, 16. Yeah, so I was 16. Yeah, and I actually got to Wagga, and I actually first used heroin when I was over there. So
there was a scene, right? A dope scene in Wagga.
Yeah.
41 years ago.
And 40 years ago. Yeah. But just as soon as I got there, I was just drinking alcoholically. Someone later on, he said, you didn't go to Wagga to play golf. He said, you went to Wagga to use drugs. And I sort of think, you know what, maybe I did, because I only lasted a couple of months in that apprenticeship, and then basically then I was, pretty much used drugs for the next sort of
full-time job,
8 years. Or 6 years, really. Yeah. So so I was pretty much unemployable from then. But then when I came back to Griffith, I actually got a job it was telecom back then, and and it was interesting. I walked in there, and everyone on the depot and everyone in the yard were really big drinkers. So we just drank, So that's all we did all day. We did a bit of work, but mostly we drank. Parked trucks behind wineries, and we parked trucks behind pubs, and after work everyone went to the pub. So it was like so I had a job, but I didn't have a job. And then I was using more heroin as well then. So I was actually had a heroin habit. I was selling drugs from I was selling pot on the job, and so I'd hardly call it. It was almost like it was a job, but I wasn't working. I was more into just getting
So
alcohol or other drugs.
the first signs of resourcefulness and resilience,
Yeah.
I'm anticipating you're selling the dope or the pot to buy the dope to fund that sort of process. Yeah. So, a lot of people don't, can't put those two and two together, but those skills, they were there from the get-go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's part of that process of, people that use illicit substances, they're very good at getting them, essentially.
Oh, that was very resourceful, And my first job when I left rehab, like I went to rehab when I was 22. And I left rehab, and part of the process to leave rehab was actually to get a job.
Yeah.
So, and I thought to myself, wow, I said, I've maintained a drug habit for a long time. I've got a lot of skills around that. I've got a lot of capacity. Even like if I needed to get a drug, whether I had $2,000 or 20 cents, I would get my drugs. So I knew I had the capacity to get my needs met. So I knew I had the capacity. So I sort of drew on that rather than say, well, I'm a no good loser and I'm a pathetic person and I need to actually let go of everything I've ever done or everything I've ever known. And what you said before was a really good point, because I used that and I went, my capacity to actually to survive and to get things done was huge. So the idea of going for a job interview was really not that big a deal. I was nervous, and actually I told the guy the truth. It was a truck driving job for an air freight company, and I said, look, I'm in rehab. I was a heroin addict. I've been in rehab now for 18 months. Like I've got a HR truck license. God knows how I kept that, but I kept it. I lost my license once when I was about, I think, 17 for drink driving, and only just had it. But the guy was like the guy that employed me, and I asked him later, I said, why me? Like, why did you pick me for the job? He said, because you told me the truth and you were honest. And I said, what I want in my people I want to employ, I want honesty in my employees, in my organisation. And I was sort of a bit like taken aback, because generally, my history of getting into trouble and been in and out of prison a few times as well. So my history was I was generally punished and put down, and shunned because of who I was. And here's this guy going, I accept you for who you are. And that was like what that did for my self-worth and self-esteem was impressive. And I worked really hard for this guy, and I really loved working and being involved in the workforce. So
I think that's another valid point that you have. Just when people like us get opportunities, we really grab them with both hands and sort of, and we're capable. We have all that sort of stuff, but as well as what I try to teach boys when they're getting out of prison, or people when they're being released, is, you don't have to go into the intimate details, but you just have to say, I was making some poor decisions and now I want to make better decisions. And part of that better decision is, I want to get a job with you. And then go from there. And it does, the main thing that I get asked when I'm trying to put someone forward for a job nowadays is, will they turn up?
Yeah.
And that's the hardest thing to get anyone to do in the workforce at the moment. Can they just turn up? I just need someone to turn up. They just don't have to do much, just turn up.
Just turn up,
So the truck, then obviously, I'm thinking you have to have gone back to school or something to do some sort of training to eventually get into work. So you didn't even go to university, no degrees, nothing.
Nothing. I ended up, I sort of left that job. I grew up in the country, so I was in Sydney, and I just felt a bit overwhelmed by Sydney. And I actually went to Adelaide, and I thought, maybe I'll go to, because there's I guess a lot of support for me still. I still wanted to stay in the city. I knew going back, to my old town, and I guess I know now that, history says if you sort of go back to your old life, you're generally going to join back into your old life. So for me, it was about, like going forward and stepping into new things. And so I just packed my gear and went to Adelaide just on spec. And I turned up there. I actually got another job. I had a history with telecom, believe it or not. And because I had that history, I actually got a job with it was Telstra then in Adelaide. So I worked with them for a few years. And then I just, I stopped working there and I just bummed around surfing for a couple of years, So I was just sort of bodyboarding all around the bottom of South Australia for a few years. And then I got a phone call from the rehab I was in, and they were talking about starting a rehab in Adelaide. And they said, "Do you want to be involved?" And it was just out of the blue. And I said, "Yeah, why not?" So they said, "Come up to Sydney, work in the rehab here, get to know it, get used to it." And I was 8 years off. I hadn't used alcohol or other drugs for 8 years at that stage. And
Nice.
so I came to Sydney, and a few years later, I was still in Sydney, and I was still working in this rehab. And then I left there for a bit, worked for a private hospital, went back to that rehab again for a few years. And then I applied for a job at a therapeutic community called Narranura, which was at Long Bay Jail. And I actually won the job, believe it or not. So, because I was the only one that had actually had therapeutic community experience. So there was my lived experience, my work experience, and I actually got told I got the job, and 2 days later I got a phone call saying you haven't got the job. So
wow, exactly what happened to me. Exactly.
Yeah. So the convener.
Anyway,
the convener of the interview panel actually got one of her mates in to do the job. So, and another guy that was on the interview panel was like, he was filthy. He was like so dirty. He said, "This is bullshit. This shouldn't happen. Come, he come and grabbed me. He invited me up to head office, and he said, 'Look, we really want you to work for us.' And, and then, he was trying to overturn the decision. It didn't happen. And then about 4 months later, again, out of the blue, he rang me and he said, 'There's a job at Parramatta Jail. Do you want it?' Yeah. And I went, 'Oh, yeah, okay.' So I ended up, and like I said, I had no formal training. I had no Cert 4, I had no, degree, no nothing. And so I went in there, I worked at Parramatta for a year. Then I went to Long Bay, worked at the violent offender program for a year. And then I went across to Narranura, and I was probably in Narranura for 10 years, and then ended up,
What year was Narranura did you get there?
I think Narranura, 2003.
Yeah, I went out 2001, but that's where I got out from.
Yeah. So, and I think the program started in 2000.
To come and apply for a job to come and work in Narranura, probably from the same bloke.
Yeah.
And that's when I was rejected from. I was told I was an unsatisfactory person.
Yeah. And I'd had a criminal record and everything. Yeah.
And so, had you done time in New South Wales corrections at that stage?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and Queensland and New South Wales. So a couple in Queensland and then one in New South Wales. And I had like supply charges. I had a lot of dishonest, all drug related. So stealing, breaking, supplying, a couple of supply charges and stuff as well. But but when I think I was 16 years since I'd been in any trouble or had any conviction, or even 16 years since I'd used alcohol or any other drug at that stage as well. So I think I just probably always sort of say I got lucky, but I just think my desire to actually get into the workforce and to work and to be productive, I think that helped me like circumnavigate a lot of the hurdles, because it's like I wasn't willing to accept no for an answer. I wasn't willing to say, well, I'm not actually worth employing. So, and I had that. I think I had that motivation within me, rather than coming to the first hurdle and they go, "You've got a criminal record, we need to check all this out," which they did.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'm actually a rehabilitated person. I've done, I'm doing what the society wants me to do. So how can you reject me when I'm actually, you're saying we want you to do this and this and that, and I go, well, I'm doing it all. I worked there for a long time. And then I went out to Broken Hill. So I worked out at Broken Hill for jail for a couple of years as well, and then got offered a job at the Flying Doctor. So, but Broken Hill jail was great. A lot of Indigenous people out of Broken Hill. So, and there's a big cycle, as you know. There's a big cycle, like turnover. It's like pretty much a lot of the same people just coming back and back and back again.
They wouldn't have been doing massive sentences out there, would they?
No, just short sentence. A lot of, just a lot of dishonesty, a lot of sort of, like AVOs, breaching AVOs, like a lot of, there's a lot of sort of, unfortunately, sadly, there's a lot of, DV. But I think Indigenous people get treated differently with DV than, maybe white fellas do, so which is disappointing because of the I think because of just the large population, and I think it's a little bit probably maybe over policed. I think a little bit. There's not a lot of opportunities.
I'd agree with
so it's
that.
basically go to jail.
Yeah,
so, yeah. But I've had a really great, and I think my history of one of just being where I'd been, being in long-term recovery, sort of working in the prison system itself, getting to know people, and I had a really good relationship with the fellas that I work with in custody, because I think they knew that I knew, and a lot of officers are quite aggressive towards towards people in custody, and they're even really aggressive towards me, because of my history. I remember when I went from Parramatta to Long Bay, there was a union meeting. They said, "Oh, be careful. There's an ex-crim coming out here to work. Be careful."
Wow.
So
I don't think I've ever been in a more political environment than Long Bay Prison.
Yeah.
Where all the units are. I was running programs out there for a bit, and it was just like, it was insane.
A lot of stuff goes on. I think it's like the prison system lives in a fear response. It's like it's constantly sort of working out of from a fearful place. And like I'd be walking down through the yard, and I get someone would be in front of me, one of the officers would be in front of me, and they'd walk through the gate, and he just sort of locked the gate on me when I was 5 meters away. And I thought, all right, so I pull out my keys, and I've got the same ID as him, I've got the same set of keys. But one time they wrote a form out about me, which didn't have any criminal record in it or anything like that, a job application form, and they gave it to a manager, and the manager goes, "That's not even your writing." I said, "I know." So there was people constantly, not everyone, but I think there was people in there that were really great as well. It's probably like that 5% of officers that actually actively go out of their way to be dicks, and there's 5% that actively go out of their way to be helpful, and then there's probably 90% that just really, they turn up for just because it's a job, So
yeah.
But the whole, I've worked now constantly for over 30 years. So, and coming from a King's Cross, basically street heroin addict, I've been homeless, and for most of my young life, once I tipped over the edge and got into full-time drug use, that's like I was basically either homeless, in jail, or in rehab, So I was, and I was just had long bad heroin habits, and no real thing. So for me to come from that to to where I am today, and I've been a good employee my whole life.
So. And that's sort of history, long-term employment in specific places as well, not just like I've been employed, every 2 years I get the sack and I go, or I move on. It's like, you really, Narranura was a solid effort, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that was such a brilliant program. And I think as far as, when you look at getting people ready for the outside world, I think it was one of the best programs around. And I suppose I don't know if people in custody are going to see this or not, but I think my advice would be, don't rely on the system. Actually draw on your own resources to prepare yourself for for life outside. Because if you depend on the system for it, when you get out, you're still a bit dependent on the system. So if you've got the internal resources and you can connect with them, you'll be more empowered to get your needs met and less dependent on the system. Because I think the environment sets up a lot of, a lot of stuff comes from the environment, the discipline, the rules, the buildings itself, the timetable, all that stuff.
And my experience in prison was sort of a dehumanizing process for me. It eroded all of my capacity to function, or not all of it, but a lot of it.
A lot of it.
I had to cook my dinner. I always had it. I had a bed. I had clothes. They give them to me. I'd have my lunch. They give it to me. Just all of those little things. You know what I mean? The things that we all take for granted on the outside. That was sort of. That's looking back, that's what was taken away. But I too believe that Narranura is probably the best program to set people up for, to sustain freedom. Disappointing that it's gone.
I couldn't believe it when they closed it. I was just totally bewildered, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't make sense, but
No.
that's
No.
that's the nature of the beast, isn't it?
That's what happens.
That's one of the reasons why I really don't do work in prison anymore, is because they dictate what's happening. Like it's not a negotiation process. It's like, no, yes.
Yeah,
And
that's
I'm
right. Yeah. And I think and same with me now. I think, meet the people coming out and create a safety net and an empowering, safe place for guys coming out to do the work. And I think that's where, you're going to be, I think, more autonomous, and you're going to have more freedom to work, and you're going to be less restricted by it's a bit of a one size fits all prison. So, and I talked to a mate of mine recently that works in the jail, and he said, look, they just, all the fellas, they turn up, they just, there's nothing engaging around, the programs that they do, because they're just little short sessions. They come in, download the session, the guys come in, tick the box for what they need to do, which they don't have that live-in, like place where people can actually go through a process of change and prepare themselves to get out. So it's disappointing. And I think the work has to be done, when, picking people up when they get out, or being there for people when they get out, because that's where the rubber hits the road, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And the way that it works now, in my opinion, is it's just designed specifically to get people back as quick as possible.
Pretty much, it feeds itself.
And if I come to you and said, hey, I've got a good idea for your business, in 5 years I'll halve it, and in 10 years I'll close it. Like, who's going to want to? It's like, wait a minute, mate, what job are you talking about? Yeah. So I understand that side of the process as well. But so you worked 20 odd years, maybe more, in corrections. As you come to the end, and I know sort of what happened, but you were going for jobs, and this was when lived experience was starting to take off, and the language and the terminology. And you applied for a job, and what happened after work?
I tried to get back
environment for 20 years.
I tried to go back to corrections, so I reapplied to go back into a couple of jobs, and there was actually one at parole in Broken Hill, so I was going to apply, and I actually went through the process. There was two of us. I knew this other guy. We both got a phone call saying, okay, we've taken you from the talent pool. This is the process, the training dates, all this sort of and I took it as, well, we're going to give you a job. And then next thing I went into visits. I go, where are things at? And they said, we got a call from head office saying that, you haven't got the position. So I went, oh, that's interesting. So I contacted head office, and no one knew anything about it. So, but what I found out, there was someone, and I'm not sure if this is true or not, but it was a reliable source that said there was someone in that office didn't like me because I'd had a lived experience of alcohol and other drugs, and had been in jail. And so I sort of, and I got that feedback from a few people.
Yeah.
So then I went in and tried to, have it investigated and have it looked at. And then I was told, well, I didn't get the position because I was dishonest, because I turned up to the office saying that I had an appointment. But that's not true. I just turned up at the office and said, oh, is the manager here? And they said, come in, because I'd had a good relationship with the staff at the office because of the work with the Flying Doctor and the prison. So basically I went to the parole office. They just let me in because I was, so come in, and I knew everyone. And so, and then I applied for a position as a program facilitator, the external program facilitator. And I won that position, and I'm sitting around for 12 months. And then one day I rang up and said, oh, what's going on? Are you running any programs? I've been trained. I'm here ready to go. And they didn't know that there was someone in Broken Hill that had been trained.
Wow. That just goes to show, one hand doesn't know what the other's doing. That's been my experience of corrections anyway. I think we'll move on from that now. So, you're working now down as a peer worker in Melbourne.
Peer worker, yeah. And Victoria, like Victoria, as far as peer work and lived experience workers, it's just they had a summit into mental health and AOD, and
Yeah,
and I guess it came out that lived experience workers are really valuable, and the government really got behind it. So there's so many opportunities for lived experience workers in Victoria, and I know New South Wales has options for mental health lived experience, but not really that much in AOD. But out here, they're pretty much saturating the sector with lived experience workers, and one of the great places like Shark down here, the self-help addiction resource centre. So they're a great advocate and they're a great driver for lived experience workers. They do a lot of training. They do peer work training. They do speaker training. They do a lot of support. They have consumer groups. They have, like parenting groups. And so it's a great organisation for people that have lived experience to be involved in. And they're great. They push the lived experience workforce, really well. So
I would suggest they're leading the way. I know a few people down there. So you've heard of Macro down there?
What is it?
Macro? It was the original Prisoners Aid, but they.
Oh, okay. Yes. So they're big leaders in this field, and I think back in a lot when I first came into rehab, there was a big push and a big acceptance of lived experience, and then they went right away from that, and it was sort of really hard for people to get a look in. But now it seems like the worm's turning and the doors are opening.
How they can monopolise it somehow, and get a training and education and all that sort of stuff. So the wealth of knowledge and experience that you have in recovery-based programs and all that sort of stuff, where do you see where it has moved forward, like where's been innovative and how's things evolved, and where do you see innovation happening?
I think there's a greater move now of just meeting people where they're at, and I think all there was a big polarization between sort of, like a lot of, different models, but I think really if we can really, and everything intersects, like there's not sort of this, there's not that. I think everything intersects, and I think that's starting to and I think a lot of people were fighting for their place in the field, so I think there was a lot of, when needle exchanges turned up,
people were trying to work out where they sat and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I think there was, people wanted to, they really fought hard to have needle exchange. They really fought hard to have pharmacotherapies. They really found hard to get acceptance of people who use drugs, and then people are really fighting hard to have, have recovery. And there was some people need to be abstinent from alcohol and other drugs. Some people don't have. That's not their harm reduction is actually to not use at all because they just can't use safely. So So now all those models are actually intersecting, and I think there's a greater acceptance of, across the board and of where everyone's at and what everyone needs. And I've noticed even in the, like rehabs now, they're not as, strict and punitive as once they were. They're a bit more, they're more case managing people, they're more supporting people. There's a lot more integrated support, I think, for people rather than this whole
about the abstinence-based rehab scenarios. Like, we know you've come here for a drug problem. All of a sudden you've been here for 3 or 4 weeks, then you use drugs. So that was sort of on the cards. But what we're going to do is withdraw all of our support and fuck you off right now, which that's just the last thing that people, I understand that they need to keep the ultimate community safe, but like, where do we put those people? Because that could be a stumble. That doesn't mean that they have to keep going on with it and all that sort of stuff. So that's been one of my sort of gripes around that process and the punitive process that, the punitive model is all through society. It's through school, it's fear-driven.
Everywhere, society.
That's the process, similar to prison. It's like, and I'm interested, I haven't met anyone yet, but I'm interested in how it fits in with our amygdala and the fight. So we're always scanning, are we safe and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
Rhetoric of like fearful. Oh, that guy's used, he's going to contaminate us all. Give him. Like that's a whole, like that's reptilian sort of scenario, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So where I am, there's a process to actually, so if someone uses, it's like, rather than, they don't just go, well, see you later, they're gone. It's like, they go, because from when people walk in, they go, okay, they start to address, have you been homeless? Yes. So they start working on accommodate. Have you been this? Have you been that? So that happens pretty much from day one. So if someone does get to a point and they do use or relapse, or have a lapse, they go into like a bit of a process where there's actually time to find someone a secure place to be, and then and then be able to be supported through the process, and then they get that thing to come back. And there is, and so it's, you can't, I suppose in a way, like having someone using chemicals in a therapeutic community disrupts the whole show, and it can actually think, but it's like, but now there's a more of a supportive, helpful process to say, well, yeah, we accept it, and this is a drug-free environment, but we're not just going to go, well, cut ties and like see you later. It's like, okay, you go into this little house for a while, until we find you a suitable place to go through your whole risk assessment, look at all the issues that you might be facing, make sure that you've got a safe place to go, you've got a pathway to actually return if you want, and you've got a pathway to actually go into, further help if that's what you want, which is, you want to access, different services and things like that, which really I think is a lot better than the old days of just, well, you've got to do a year, unpack your gear, piss off, which is really
what I experienced in my numerous stages of treatment.
So they're slowly but surely, like relaxing that event. It's probably not even relaxing it, but they're just probably engaging in a more compassionate, supportive approach, I think.
We've learnt more about human behaviour, and that they're not
100%.
just, we're not just degenerates that are just using for the sake of it. Like it's a self-soothing, whatever that is, or whatever you want to title it, they're not doing it because they're feeling really good about themselves.
No, that's right. And I think any other, like if someone has a cancer relapse or a diabetes or a liver disease relapse, they don't just kick people out of treatment. They actually, they go, okay, how can we? And in a way, addiction in some, and a lot of people have different views, but I heard one of the addiction medicine specialists the other day. We did a Q&A at one of the movie theaters after an addiction movie, and the addiction medicine, he said addiction in a way is one of the only terminal illnesses it can be for some people that people can actually recover from. Like you don't recover from liver disease, you don't recover from heart disease, you don't, but if you are chronically addicted and you're in that place, you actually can recover. So and I went to rehab 8 times, so so it's not like you just, and I think the average presentation for treatment is 8 to 10 times before people actually
that change.
Yeah, that's right. So, and I was never discharged. I always left because I had a cunning plan.
I think I had a similar plan, mate. Couldn't get past check day though. When you couldn't get one over the counter, mate. I really it's gone. Our time's up.
Oh, well,
time to go quick, didn't I?
It did.
I could talk today about you, so really appreciated you coming on, mate. Giving us
thanks a lot.
insights into everything that you do and where you've been and what you're doing, and hopefully someone gets some inspiration from it. You inspire me to want to do better in my life. So thanks for that.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. I really appreciate it. And I guess the last thing is just, I think for a lot of people, take the ball up yourself and demand success for yourself. I think that's probably the best. That's the thing that I think really helped me a lot. Yeah,
and I like to work, when I work with guys nowadays, I like to create safety, and then it's personal responsibility. Like, mate, I'm not going to, I'm not, you're a grown man. I don't need to be your dad. I don't need to hold your hand. Just knock that over, pick it up. Personal responsibility. Simple as that.
Yeah, and we are capable. We're more than capable. So
more than capable, mate.
So
some of the stuff I've seen in prison was MacGyver-like.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, mate. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate
it. Thanks, Steve. And good on you. Good luck with it. I hope everything goes well with this.
Thanks. Take care, mate. Talk soon.
Thanks. Okay, bud.